Okay, so this is Elusive Victory. It's based on Downtown. It's basically Downtown is focused on modern, well, Cold War era jets. They seem modern to me. They're my era, right? Not quite, a little earlier in both cases. But anyway, Cold War era jets trying to penetrate air defenses. Elusive Victory is a more symmetrical game in that it covers a situation where both sides have significant air forces, although the Israeli Air Force tends to be much, much stronger in terms of quality, which is actually the important factor in this. Quantity, sometimes the Egyptians, which is all we're facing here, this is over Sinai, in the Suez Canal, will have a significant advantage there. Now, the way this game came about in my hands is kind of a funny story, so I've got to give you that, but I don't want to babble too much because of the way it came about. First of all, I think I have some other games by the same designer on similar principles. I'm not absolutely sure. I think Bomber Command is his. I guess I should look before. No, this is Mark Davies, but it may be based on it. I don't know. So, anyway, I've been vaguely interested in modern air war type stuff, but it's never been a very strong focus for me. The closest I think I came to something like this, which is the scope of this game is kind of strange. I was going to say it's operational, but it really isn't. It's tactical, but not tactical air fighting the way that a number of other tactical air fighting games is. I mean, it's not on the same level as, say, Richthofen's War or Spitfire, or a whole series of these games where you're basically just flying. There's some similarities to Richthofen's. We'll give it that. But the spread of the board is much larger because the planes are much faster and have longer flying distances, etc. There are going to be missions going on in this, and they're pretty major missions. We're not talking about, hey, this is a little dogfight between 6 planes. We're a step further from that. We're at a step where the planes are going to be represented as flights of between 1 and 4 airplanes each, and they're given missions to go conduct bombing raids, conduct anti-air suppression, and some photo reconnaissance to assess damage, etc. Anyway, this is a little far from what I normally cover, but it's not like I'm completely uninterested. It's just I don't have a lot of good comparison for it, and it's hard for me to get into something that's far from what I'm kind of used to in this sort of way. And that's one of the reasons that I'm doing it. I was contracted and being paid to not really review the game, but to teach it. Someone has a desire, and I think this is crazy talk, but apparently he's able to get something from that. So let's jump in. Now, I've already done, there's this weapons training introductory scenario, which was basically follow along and move things on the map as the book does them. You don't get to roll dice. You don't get to make any decisions whatsoever. You're basically just reading the script and playing it out on the board. I didn't find that terribly useful, especially since there were some small errors in it, or else in me. I'm not sure which. The rulebook itself I've read through. It seems understandable, but capturing it all in my head is going to be very, very difficult. And if you saw my struggles with that introductory scenario, there's a lot of charts to page through in this game. These are all different. Now, these guys are informational charts that carry stuff that you probably can write down for a particular scenario based on your planes or whatever. It's not stuff that you have to constantly be looking up if your aircraft sheets have as much information as you need in them. Unfortunately, the pre-designed flight log sheets do not have all the information you need. You really do need to have these available to look up, hey, this is an A4E, you know, what's its speed at these different instances, etc. I find that a little surprising. If I'm going to be writing stuff down on paper, I think that I should be capturing, you know, the information out of those charts there, among other things. But as you can see, there's a lot of spaces on here, and there's some fairly large scenarios. I have a suspicion that those large scenarios are unplayable out of the box, that I'm going to have to make new components or something to cover certain aspects of them. We shall see. There's some misprints on some of the counters that make them have problems that are going to require additional pieces as well. All right, so let's start looking at the rules. We open up with a glossary of terms, and this is kind of important. We're going to have to refer to this fairly often because unlike like just ZOC or something, there's a lot of stuff that's not common wargame parlance here. Some of it is the technology. So for example, Hawk, homing all the way, killer US made SAM system. Okay, great. That's just the name of a thing. We don't really, you know, need that, but whatever. But, you know, we're going to have things like map. And that has nothing to do outside the game. It's MIG availability points. It's something that works in some of the scenarios in terms of buying the pieces. So we may see things and just have no idea what they're talking about. And others, which are, I mean, like Hawk, for example, which are common, you know, say military parlance for what the item is, I don't have the kind of knowledge and understanding of this period of air warfare to be able to talk about it at all. Game uses 10-sided dice. All the charts, and I went over this before, have the number of dice that you roll on them. So this one says 2 dice is rolled. I don't see any that say 1. Here's one. There's one that has 1 die rolled on it. And that just tells you that's a useful little technique, something carried over from Avalon Hill games, which helps remind you, you know, hey, I know I need to use this chart, but quite often I'm looking and I'm saying, I don't know how many dice to use. Now here it's pretty damn obvious, but in some of the cases it's not obvious whether you should be using 1 or 2 dice. Take a look at some of the components. First of all, you have the map. You have a nice map key here. This has some on-map printed anti-aircraft, which might not be present in the scenario, but is going to generally be there. I don't know what the SAM box is. That's scenario specific. We have different airfields, and they have this strip on it which indicates which way you have to align your plane to land or take off. That's kind of cool. Some minor airfields that are not as restricted. Pyramids, in case you need them. I think just for historical purposes. Fortifications give a hardened target, as installations might as well. And again, these become scenario targets or whatever in the case of it. Most of the ground doesn't matter, although some things like rough terrain, urban terrain, they provide some cover if you're flying low enough from the radars, etc. And likewise, ridges can actually prevent a line of sight from being traced from the ground to your plane if you're flying low enough again. If you're flying at any reasonable altitude, the ground cover isn't going to help you. The actual counters. So these are for lock-ons based on, I think, just the various SAMs, but there are a lot of SAMs on the Egyptian side. Yeah. And each SAM can only be tracking one plane, so these align with the numbers on the SAMs. Now, as you can see, there's huge quantities of each of these. It's going to be pretty hard to align them properly, but you know, we'll fish out counters as we need them and take breaks as we need it for that. These are different kinds of anti-aircraft equipment. We'll get to that in a bit. These guys are dummy plane counters. Now, these are what are on the map until you've identified what the enemy planes are. And once you identify them, you replace them with something that tells you exactly what it is. Both identified and unidentified planes can have an undetected or detected side, which indicates how aware you are of their existence on an operational level. In terms of the whole field can react to it to some extent. With these crew markers, those are if you get shot down. Let's see. I don't know what these are for. These are the initiative markers. This is going to work on a kind of a chit pull type system. And then for the Israeli, we have similar for everything. Over here are a couple of notations. When you launch SAMs, you can only do it once per turn, so there's a marker for that. Maneuver indicates that your plane has done something which can make it easier to detect, etc. And disordered is really that the flight is no longer in order. Is no longer in good formation. This is a defensive wheel. If you're in a location you're not flying from point A to point B, you can end up going into this defensive wheel, which provides you with the ability not to be surprised very easily. In addition to all the charts and tables, which there are a lot of, we have these planning maps. So whoever's making the attack raid is supposed to draw out every flight that's making a bombing or reconnaissance mission on these planning maps, and then from there they're going to be able to they try to follow that as best as possible. They can get disrupted from it. Certain shots, etc., knock you off your path, and then you have to go back to a waypoint and try to reestablish your flight path again. You see, this is almost an impossibility for playing the larger scenarios. It was very, very difficult to read, and it's still on here, the lines that I drew on one map. Now, this is perhaps because this is a photocopy rather than the original, but man, that map is awfully small, and any kind of reproduction of it, unless it's picture perfect of the original. This is one of the originals. No, this is my photocopy. Here's an original, which is a little bit better printing, unless it's a really high quality reproduction of it. I think you're not going to have a very easy time plotting even one flight, but it's the larger scenarios, man, I don't know what you're supposed to do, you know. Different colored pencils, do those even erase? I don't know. Anyway, we may not get many plays out of this simply because of various mechanical issues that make this game very frightening to me, beyond a very, very heavy rule set. Okay. And then you have these sheets where you program in what what planes and installations you have on the map. So your anti-aircraft guns will be programmed down here. You have the number of shots, which is insufficient for the Hawk at the very least, and the profile, which is pretty much fixed for type. It's kind of strange to use up space for that. It may differ between certain types, and it may matter if you're in an installation or a defensive location. Up here, it's the particular, you program in, this is really for the defender, the flights that they have available. And that way you can write the counter number for their plane, which is really going to be this. And then if that gets switched out for a plane that's known, well, I guess you use the call sign for that, I'm not sure. AC type, that's the type of plane itself. Aggression rating, that's going to be a pilot quality type of thing. And then the weaponry that it's carrying with it, and the fuel that it has on board at the time. Now, that's for the defender. The offender has a similar sheet, but the advantage with his. Now, I wish, I'll tell you what I think instead of this map. I think what you should be doing is for each flight, you actually write out a flight plan on paper, not on this map, not trying to draw it out on the map. This may work with a good reproduction for one flight, but I'm beginning to think it's not possible. But there's no reason I couldn't have written from this space a direction to this space, a direction change to this space, etc. I don't see this mapping system as being terribly valuable at all. And that being the case, I would kind of want the plane to be on the same sheet as its flight plan, which is to say, or the flight, because these are not one single plane, which is to say I would like to see a line under here that contains the flight plan right after the actual plane for the attacker sheet. Not there. The attacker sheet planes contain more information. Primarily what they seem to additionally contain, this RHM, which I have no idea what that is, why that's not over here, maybe because there was no room to make it tight, but what that includes is some bombing information that you can track, tasking, and mission. I'm not sure what the difference of those two are, but essentially, I guess you could be writing down whether it's tasking, I think, is whether it's on a bombing, a recon, or a cap type mission. Or maybe it's the opposite, I'm not sure. But they seem to be the same kind of thing. Maybe it's defined later in the rules, we'll see. I don't remember there being a differentiation. Anyway, I feel like not a lot of great thought was put into making the play aids for this game. Great, we haven't gotten anywhere in the rules yet, have we? Yeah, I know. There's not a lot of information on the individual counters. These counters are really just to mark where things are on the map. The information is going to be either transferred to these sheets or, and it may not make it onto these sheets simply because there's not space for some of the information, it's going to be present on the aircraft data chart. Again, I would think you'd want to transfer that information. It doesn't feel like the lessons of games like Car Wars, Starfleet Battles, I'm trying to think what else, Richthofen's War even, have been carried over into this design very well. But, on the other hand, I think you have to be pretty much a fanatic to be into this kind of game, in terms of a fanatic for air warfare. Of whatever period you're talking about, because there's a really hefty curve here. And given that, maybe it's not unreasonable to assume players will just make their own play aids. It would be helpful towards getting started, though, if, well, there's a lot that would be helpful towards getting started that's not here. Okay. we are going to pause for a bit because this is going to take us many, many days to get through these rules. I know it. Okay. Yeah, that was a great move. Fuck me. Some more. Trying to use this damn tripod. I don't know if it's going to do me any good here, but my wrist hurts so much when I'm trying to go through rolls. Okay. So, like I mentioned before, there's a chit pool. Now, I can't look and see what you're seeing with the camera without getting up, and then I'm not doing anything. There's a chit pool cup, which is made up of these counters. Now, it's distinguished by how many units there's going to be in a force, whether it's a large force which uses one side or a small force. And I think that's 10 flights is the difference. If there's 10 flights on the board, it's considered a large force. I may be wrong. Yeah, okay. And these chits are put in a pool and you draw them at the beginning of a movement phase. Now, the first thing that happens is whoever's the defender in the situation decides who's going to have to move first. And it's possible that the scenario has special rules that govern that anyway, beyond that. A chit is pulled, and then by the player whose move it is, and they have to move that many flights. So in this case, they'd have to move one. After they've done so, the initiative passes to the next player, and they have to move. They draw their own chit pool, their own chit draw. So you have a lot of randomness going on in terms of that. In the case that flights have not yet crossed the Suez Canal, which here and keeps running across. I don't know if you can see the damn thing because I'm trying to deal with this stupid tripod. Oh, that's fun. And you're at least 12 hexes or more from an enemy flight. You don't have to chit pull. The defender moves all his flights. The attacker moves all his flights. But once planes start entering the Sinai or enter or cross the Suez Canal or whatever, then you have to start doing chit pulls, draws. We looked a lot into movement while we were playing. So there's some interesting concepts here. I don't know if you can see or not, but you can see that the counters can be on a hex spine as well as on a hex, and facing on a hex they can either face the vertex or they can face the edges. And depending on where you'd move, if you're facing a vertex, your next move is going to be onto the edge, continuing facing the way you are. So it gives you more directions of possible movement for that. Now, turning is done in 30-degree segments because we've got those. You can end up on the vertices. If you're on a hex side and you turn, you slip into the hex when you do the turn. So here I'm doing a 30-degree turn. Well, I can't be facing off into nowhere, so I drop into that hex. So I'm kind of doing a banking maneuver with that turn. It's kind of interesting. If you happen to be in a hex side, this kind of location here, then you're sort of in both hexes. If you're attacked, you can be attacked in either of the two hexes at the attacker's option. Now, if it ends up being forced to either scatter or do SAM avoidance, in either case, it falls into the hex that it was attacked in, whichever one that is. And that's because they're going to have to do a further movement after that. Okay. Air-to-ground attacks can be made from a hex side as long as the target's not in an adjacent hex, which sounds to me like most bombing you're not going to be able to do. You have to be in the actual hex. Exactly. A flight can't bomb sideways. Alright. You have different altitude markers, and we've seen them in my little weapons training. We've got deck, low, medium, and high. And I hope you can see these counters. I can't tell. This is important, among other things. It has effects on combat, etc. But from the aircraft data chart, you're able to find the speed of the plane at the different altitudes, depending on whether it's doing a combat or dash movement. And maneuver, what the hell that's for? That may be after you get a maneuver counter on you. It looks very fast, though. Okay. If you choose combat throttle, your speed can be anything up to, well, no, your speed can be either the value that's on here or one less. And if you do dash, you can do it anywhere between the combat value and the dash value. So, for example, if we had a Mirage that was not loaded with weaponry and it was at high altitude, I could actually do anywhere between 4 and 7 at dash movement. At combat movement, I could only do 3 or 4. Okay. So actual movement is broken into a number of possible actions. And let's see if we can see. We can't see any of the board here. My zoom sucks. Alright, well, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate on the board because I don't have. I'm using this stupid thing. Let's unscrew it. Yeah, this is why we don't use it. Because if I need to show you anything, like, or play the game or anything, it just doesn't work. Okay. So, we'll use this as our counter for the different movement actions. One movement action is to move one hex straight ahead. And when you do this, you can make a free turn up to the allowance indicated on the turntable. Wow, where's the turntable? That is 6.32, which is over here, and if I'm going to have the camera, I have no reason to wear clothing, so I'm taking a break. Table is simply a comparison of your speed, and it gives you a free turn that you're allowed to make each time you move a hex, and then a maximum total turn that you can make, which might involve spending a movement point. Now, when you enter a hex, you're allowed to make a free turn up to the degrees in the free turn, and that can go up to a right angle turn and possibly. And or you're allowed to drop one altitude level. Okay. You can spend a movement point in order to turn up to your maximum turn value. And when you do this, you're allowed to drop an altitude level. You can spend a movement point to climb one altitude level. And when you do this, you're allowed to do a free turn up to the allowance from the chart. Any additional climbs that you make in the same movement phase are going to cost you 2 movement points instead of 1 from then on. And you're not allowed to do a free climb if you did anti-radar tactics. Now, anti-radar tactics, I think, involve being on the deck and trying to use the ground to protect you. But there may be other versions of it. We don't know. No, it's actually a drop in altitude. We'll have to see that when it happens. You could do a dive for a movement point. That allows you to drop to any lower altitude band. And when you do the dive action, you're allowed a free turn based on the turntable. You can do a special attack. This is a toss bombing attack, which is sort of dropping a bomb off to the side. Not exactly. It's not to the side, it's forward. But you can throw it over an obstacle, basically. I'm not quite sure what that represents, but I trust these rules a lot more than my understanding of air combat. So, or you can do a lofted ARM attack. Well, what's an ARM? I don't know. That's why we have a glossary, because there's all these terms that anti-radiation missile. What kind of attack with that? A lofted one. That may be the one. So I can't tell the difference between tossing and lofting. We'll see. One of them allows you to throw it over, and it may be the ARM, because that's at least a guided missile. That allows you to throw it over an obstacle. The toss may be something else. Well, why don't we see what the fuck that is? Hurled at high speed in a climb. So yeah, you're doing some kind of climb in the midst of... It's a short range climb that doesn't show up on your altitudes. And you're able to get more distance on the bomb by throwing it out that way. And you could do SAM avoidance, which is 15.33. And this is going to be a roll and dive in order to prevent a missile from hitting you. And it gives a penalty to the hits, I think, is all it does. It may move you or something like that. Again, this game is just so full of little rules. There's just no way to teach it. You know, the only way is to play it and play it and play it, and eventually you'll get used to it. And it's kind of like, you know, things like Starfleet Battles, where there's not really a simple version of it, though. You have to kind of play with most of the rules. The only question is, hey, you can add more as you go. But there's most of it is the base rules. You can climb and dive more than once in the same hex, but you cannot expend movement points to climb and dive in the same hex. Okay. So here's the turn chart, for some reason reproduced in the rules. And as I said, you can do free turns with these. These are what you can make when you pay a movement point. You cannot make consecutive turns in the same hex and altitude band. You must either move a hex or turn, or change altitude. If you begin your movement phase in a hex and altitude band and you didn't turn in your previous movement phase, you can expend your first movement point to make a turn. Zoom climbs. If you want to climb twice or more in the movement phase, you're doing a zoom climb. This is where they cost 2 movement points to climb instead of 1 after that first climb. Laden flights and flights in combat throttle are not allowed to zoom climb. If you've zoom climbed, you take some combat penalties for the remainder of the game turn. Now, there are no markers to remind you of this, so you just have to keep this in mind for all the different flights you have. And remember, And there are scenarios with more than 10 flights per side. In fact, many of them. Defending flights that commence combat against a higher enemy are considered to have zoom climbed. Ridge lines. Okay, so we got these little ridges here. And here, terrain on the map has an effect on you. You can't cross these if you're on the deck. It includes the corner of the hex touched by the ridgeline artwork. If you're forced to cross a ridgeline as a consequence of a scatter, it's going to be treated like the edge of the map. Well, how do we treat the edge of the map? Gosh. Are we dead? Is something else happen? You keep rolling until you can legally move. I don't know why they can't repeat that. You know, I mean, there's a certain level to preventing repetition, but here, yeah, you know, it would take about the same. Maneuver markers. Okay. When you do a dogfight, or if you do a hard turn, you may have to take a maneuver marker. These happen when you scatter in air-to-air combat. If you begin movement with a maneuver marker, you have to spend half your movement points to remove that marker, getting yourself aligned into a position where you can fly normally. Entering and exiting the map, it costs a movement point to enter the map. You can spend more to enter if you wish in order to slow down a set of flights coming in. So you could bring some in and then some behind them, basically. Stacking. Okay, so this is an interesting thing. This is a rule that I'm not quite sure what it means, but we'll see what we're talking about. Stacking occurs when a flight occupies the same hex and altitude band as another friendly flight. Flights occupying hexes are stacked with flights in hex sides, are stacked with flights in both hexes, but not with flights on different sides of the same hex. Stacking is permitted during movement to allow flights to move through each other, but a flight's last movement point cannot be used to stack it with another unit. It is pretty clear. What it comes down to is you can fly through each other, but you can't stop your movement there. Now, what does that exactly mean? I think if you turn in a hex at a given altitude band and you end up in a stacked position, you're considered to have been stacking at that point, which means you have to move out of that hex. You can't like do a turn or dive or something like that. All of these things will count as stacking. That's not quite how it's read, but whatever. Stacking is allowed when a flight enters another flight's hex and altitude as a result of scatter or SAM avoidance, or it halts in place as a result of combat. Defensive wheels allow stacking with friendly flights. Flights may stack with enemy flights without any restriction. And there you're dogfighting. And we're done for probably the day. Like I said, this is going to take me weeks to get through the rules, I think. I've got such an avoidance towards this. It's just so hefty. Well, I took a day off for a break because, hey, I'm moving up to formations, another big segment. Actually, there aren't much in the way of formations. There's one, the defensive wheel, which we've already vaguely talked about. Very limited number of planes can enter the defensive wheel. The MiG 17 and the Mystère or Ouragan, the Mystère 4 can do it. You need at least 2 planes in a flight. And since you can dump other flights in, yeah, you can stack them into that, but it's going to have to be all the same planes. They don't expend any movement points. They're just circling around, nose to tail. And the advantage is, well, they have no heading, so all arcs are their forward arc. And all flights and the flight is considered combat throttle. It doesn't take any disadvantage ever, and you can never surprise it. They don't scatter, and they can't be marked with a maneuver marker. However, if the flight gets bumped out of the wheel because of being disordered, it will be scattered and marked with a maneuver marker. In an air-to-air combat, an attacker rolls once to engage all the flights in the wheel, but then he can split shot opportunities between different targets in the stack. You'll be able to do that normally, is pick your targets for, you can gang up on one plane or not. Flights can exit the defensive wheel at the beginning of movement before flights on the map move, and you just remove the marker from the flight. The flight faces in the desired heading, and then it can move in that movement phase. I guess stacking requirements don't screw you up. So you have like this weird situation where you're overstacked or something. I have no idea. Okay. On to what's kind of interesting here, which is the idea of raid and task planning. We've already talked about this, probably in too much detail on the training. You're supposed to draw your raids out on this sucker. I think that's impossible, but we'll keep talking. A mission, and I think you can do it on paper without that. A mission is an organizational term for a group of units that are plotted to enter the map together. A raid is several missions. A mission can include flights with different tasks. So you have different types of missions listed here. Actually, these are different tasks according to this, but here they talk about them as missions, Apparently the game doesn't seem to really, like, they use these two terms and they use them interchangeably, but they don't really call that out. And there are places where, like on this sheet, it has tasking and mission. It makes me think there are two. Maybe there's something different. I don't know. But okay, the Israeli forces that start off map have an ingress and egress hex plotted on their planning map. And these can be any legal map edge for that scenario. If you end up exiting more than 5 hexes from your egress map, you have to make a recovery roll to come on. You don't have to use the same point plotted for ingress and egress. The Egyptians also have these. However, they have the alternative of picking a hex, 6 hexes of, within 6 hexes of a launch airfield, used by the bombing, recon flight, or close escort flight. I don't know if those are limitations in that parenthetical or whatever, as its ingress hex, and set up the bombing recon flights airborne with any close escort flights within 4 hexes of the bombing recon flight. So I'm guessing that you can only launch. I don't know if there are other kinds of mission. See, this is the thing. Yeah, I mean, you can launch the escorts for it in the same place. So I don't know what the limitation is. And does it mean that, like, no, I can't do SEAD, which is the anti-air defense missions, in this way? I can understand I can't do jamming, but I don't know. All right. So here's and again, flights are assigned the tasks listed. If the flight lists defend, the flight cannot initiate an attack in any area or combat. So, for example, bomb, we can pick an air-to-ground bomb raid where we pick a particular target, and we're going to have to plot this whole thing out. We could, for the air-to-air behavior, it defends, so it can't launch, it can't engage in a combat. And it must abort if the ordnance is jettisoned prior to the target, i.e. they can't continue flying on with their mission as some sort of additional firepower for that mission or something. SEAD is trying to take out anti-air capabilities now. EGROF is just like another word for that or something. We can look them up in the stupid glossary. That's what I had to do. I don't remember enough. And again, that's like a bombing mission. It just uses different weapons. CAP. So CAP is up here in order to launch air attacks. I don't think you have to write a navigation path for it. Armed escort. Armed escort is going to be, well, here's what's weird. So only IAF fighter flights can perform this task. This task is given an EGROF, the anti-air defense mission. However, if all its ordnance is expended or jettisoned, it can continue as a cap. Okay, whatever. It's kind of like a bomber that's allowed to switch to a fighter, but it's called an armed escort for some reason. I don't know. Close escort. This does not have any air-to-ground capability. It can attack and defend, and it sounds exactly like CAP. The difference is that it's assigned to a mission to help protect it. CAP is free moving. You certainly would never want to do close escort except for the fact that the scenario may require you to, I guess. Or if you want to take advantage of being able to launch close escorts from an air base. Because CAP can't be, for some unknown reason. Recon. This will be only recon capable units. Now, this is treated just like a bombing mission, except you're trying to take pictures instead. And unlike most games, it's not just a, yeah, I mean, if you think about it like Richthofen's War or something, you have a recon mission. Oh, look, you know, that's just what you're doing. Here, you're planning this out, and you've got a victory requirement to actually observe the effects of your bombing raids. So there's some rationale for it beyond the observe the trench lines type of thing. Jamming, you need to have standoff jamming capabilities, and I do not know whether or not these need a plotted attack, or if they're kind of free moving. Strike cap, okay, I don't know what that is. This is only Israeli F-4E Mirage 3CJ and EAF MiG-21s. The flight's a bombing task. However, if they get rid of their air-to-ground ordnance, they change to a cap. Well, gosh, sounds to me like, again, like the armed escort. This is, you know, the task you would always want to do with the planes. Now, you have limitations on which planes you can do it on here, which are different from the armed escort, where you're allowed to, like, looks like use any plane you like. Okay, let's go to the navigation. Bombing and recon. Is that only those two tasks? I know SEAD is free to move around quite a bit, but I guess that means that armed escort and strike cap are kind of, well, armed escort is different. Strike cap, it's tasked with bombing. I think it has to follow a bomb run initially, and then when it turns into cap, it won't. Is going to have to define their pathway to the bombing run, and then their path home as well, perhaps. They have to draw straight lines on the map to connect to make the path. It starts from an airfield, an airborne location, or their ingress hex, and then it must pass through the hex containing the raid's target. By drawing straight lines from the ingress to the target, and then another line from the target to the egress, the flight path can be drawn. They say join the dots, the bullshit that's just back and forth, you know. But normally, you'd be adding different waypoints, and that'll allow you a little bit of secrecy here, because you can fly, you know, not directly, and avoid some, you know, defensive locations that you might not want to fly over. And you're allowed up to 6 of these, so you can kind of build a 6, I think, well, I'm not going to do the math in my head, but I think it's a 5-sided object, but it's not necessarily closed, right? But it could be. So you plot that on the flight path, and here you have one flying in from here, doing something happening here. I don't know what this is. I guess that's part of the map. Moving down here and then making a turn. And you plot all of the movement that you're planning, basically, on there. Now, what it doesn't say here is whether or not you plot the altitude at which these different segments are done. The weapons training scenario seems to indicate that the altitude is pre-plotted, but it's not present in these rules in any way. And I'm not sure how you would plot it on the map. I know how you would do it on paper. Then you have to follow that flight path. And you start within 2 hexes of the ingress hex. You fly direct to the next waypoint, following the line plotted. Now, it looks to me like you're allowed to kind of fudge that by the 2 hexes throughout, in case you have some tactical desires there. Each hex move must be closer to the next waypoint than the next. Once you move within 2 hexes of the waypoint, you're at that waypoint, and now you must begin moving to the next waypoint in order, which is less, which seems kind of fuzzy, as though you must start your turn or whatever, as opposed to what was basically absolute plotting in that weapons training scenario. Again, not really clear what that scenario is meant to teach. It certainly doesn't represent the rules completely. If a recon flight has been disordered, it may resume its mission by removing the disordered marker at a rally point. Now, the rally points are a different predefined concept, and then you have to rejoin the flight at the nearest waypoint to where you got knocked off. Rejoin the flight path. Within 2 hexes of the target, the bombing and recon flights can move freely without restriction. They must return to the flight path when they leave the vicinity of the target. Again, not the kind of strict planning that the weapons training scenario seems to have. Of course, that may all just be, hey, this is just where your plane is moving, and look, it happens to be, you know, within the rules of the tracking. But it doesn't point out that difference, and I mean, that thing is just totally useless, and that's why we did it on video, right? I would have never touched it if I'd known what it was. Within 2 hexes of the target, yeah. Flights tasked with arm escort, cap, jamming, SEAD, they don't have to have a flight path, and they can fly freely. Close escort are on a bombing path, bombing flight, and they must stay within 4 hexes of the bombing flight that they're escorting. Whoa. Okay. Close escort is actually part of the bombing mission. It's not that other kind of escort, the armed escort or whatever the fuck it is. But once they detect an enemy flight, visually or by radar, or become engaged, then they become a pure cap flight, and they can go wherever they like. You know, they probably want to protect their bombers, but whatever. A scenario may have multiple targets for a raid, in which case you plot a single flight path. Huh? It must pass through at least 1 target hex, but does not have to pass through all of them. Oh yeah, this is just goofy. Bombing and recon flights may move freely within 2 hexes of any target hex. Bombing and recon may fly. Okay, so if I must attack multiple targets spread across more than 1 hex, it looks like I have to build my entire flight path to get me within range of any of them that I'm going to actually attack, which is not what I assumed. I thought you drew different flight paths for each raid. Oh wait, well, see, we don't know the words here, right? Because here, multiple raids. Some scenarios say there's multiple raids on the map at each time. Each raid has a different target. Now, before we had missions, which seemed to be a certain thing, but I thought raids were a set of missions at once, which could be multiple bombing runs, but it looks to me like they're kind of shifting these things about. I gotta swap batteries, and we're almost done with this section, and then I want to break anyway. I can only face a very limited amount of rolls at a time anymore, and that's just what we're going to deal with. And this is take me a few more, probably about a week to get through, I think, at the pace I'm going. All right, flights can abort due to morale, random events, damage, lack of ordnance, depletion, la la la. If a flight aborts, it's moved freely, unrestrained by the flight path rules. Well, gosh, if I have a lack of ordnance because I dropped it all, how come I have to return by my flight path then? I don't know. Any flight that aborts can move freely. Aborted flights cannot initiate air-to-air combat or conduct air-to-ground attacks. There are no specific restrictions, but they should try to be getting back to an airfield or back off map. Okay, advanced navigation. So we mentioned rally points. Well, that's an advanced rule. And advanced rules in this game seem to mean optional. They're inserted into the game rules, and that's, I think, the best situation where they would belong, as opposed to creating a section of advanced and optional rules or anything. You can plot a rally point for each raid. Rally points may be plotted in any hex containing rough or urban terrain or part of a river. Additionally, all friendly open airfields can be used as rally points. I guess you don't have to plot those, is what they're saying, but I'm not sure. Rally points must be at least 10 hexes from the target hex, and this may eliminate a friendly open airfield as a legal rally point. Cap aircraft are exempt from this rule. What? Cap have rally points? Rally points modifier discovery disorder recovery rolls. Let's just combine words. Orbit points. Orbit points are any hex within 3 hexes of a friendly active airfield. You use these to set up your airborne cap flights at the beginning of the scenario, and the active airfield used as the basis of an orbit point may also serve as a rally point. You can also be given cap setup instructions by SSR. This is such an important thing. It's scenario setup rules, okay? They had to create an acronym for that. Man, I fucking hate too many acronyms in a game. This game is just wading in them. Plotting altitude. When plotting the raid, you must note the altitude band used by all bombing task flights and the flight path hexes into which the altitude band changes. Bombing flights must fly at the plotted altitude. That's, I think, perfect, very reasonable. My feeling is, at first I was saying, you know, this game's too complicated. I can't play with the advanced rules. But honestly, with rules like that, I feel like the game doesn't even work properly without them. So the rally point rule, for example, well, that's referenced elsewhere. And it seems to be the only place you can get rid of your disorder marker is if you're playing with that advanced rule. And likewise here, not plotting the altitude is really, you know, if I have to do a hex by hex plotting on the map, I pretty much should have to know the general altitude I'm going in. Anyway, that's that. We've made it another page or two. And we'll, gosh, should we load this yet? We're getting close to our time. All right, I think this one's going up. There's going to be many segments on the rules here.